Do you find that there's any particular region that your kind of guests and customers are like really interested in more so than any others? Do you think that there's a trend right now in any specific like countries or regions that have changed kind of over the course of your career in general?
Because everything's virtual today, and then before COVID, I was working literally on the floor in Portugal. So clearly that's a different
Yeah.
mindset of what they're asking for there. And when I say there and they, I mean in Lisbon specifically, and people who visit Lisbon and able to like choose wine. It's not everyone looking for Portuguese wines. It's Portuguese people probably looking for wines that are international, like French, Italian, etc. And then there's the American, British, Asian tourists who come in looking for Portuguese wine. So I'm like, it's always a mixed bag when they come into the restaurant. But in the case with through the virtual tastings, I would say people are a little bit more open-minded because they're at home and they're interested in kind of like exploring because they're in a house and really just want me to suggest. I think there's been more of a push, if you want to say, in the industry to come, like, especially within this current season of fall, that we've been talking more about orange wines. And so I've been doing a lot more wines on skin contact wines and how wines are made. People, you realize, as much as they love rosé, they don't know how rosé is even made until you start talking about orange wine. Because they're like, wait a minute, what makes it orange? And I said, well, what makes rosé pink? And then you realize they don't even know. So it's like, okay, so let's have that conversation first, because everyone is familiar with rosé, but no one asks the questions. I don't know how it became so popular with no one questioning it. But orange wine, everyone questions, like, why is it orange? So that, if I did some wine psychology, that's something I would want to explore too. Like, why no one question why it's pink, but they question why it's orange, So that I've been doing that. A lot of virtual tastings. I've been just trying to find things that are unique to, I like to call out Middle America. Sometimes they're not going to visit the New York Cities and the LAs and the San Franciscos of the world anytime soon, or the Miamis. So I like calling out wines that they can order on, a website or through me to have our virtual tastings that they can actually do some more exploring. So I actually created a wine club called Flight Crew recently. And in there, because at the traveler in me wants to take people on destinations with the wine. So last month for October was Portugal, of course, and that was easy because that was the first month. And one of my friends who was a winemaker, his wine actually got finally into the country. So it was nice to be able to feature his wine. For November, I'm doing Eastern European wines. And if you're following already, I have a live stream YouTube channel where I talk with up to 6 wine professionals at one point around the world, usually. And we did Georgia last month. And so it was nice to have this kind of conversation about Georgian wine. And I always have like a local ambassador from each of the countries when I do a country focus. So we had someone literally right outside of Tbilisi, join us for the tasting. And so everybody had Georgian wine. And so it was a nice way to kind of get even other wine professionals, to be honest, like I never even cared about looking at the map of Georgia, or maybe I know what it is, I know what to expect, but now we're talking about Georgian orange wines, we're talking about or amber wine, and then also red wines from there, and it is nice to just kind of like have these conversations with people, whether it's other wine professionals like yourselves or talking with wine consumers about places they just don't even think, like I wouldn't even think to order a wine from that said Georgia, and most people when you say Georgia, they think the state. The fact that they think the state before the country already tells you that Georgia needs some help. So answer your question in a roundabout way, I really don't know if I'm following the trend of what consumers want, because I don't really know if they know what they want. But things will never go out of style, right? Rosé would never go out of style. So that's always very popular. I taught a class on Prosecco in person recently, which was interesting to do an in-person live event. But yeah, that Rosé Prosecco is coming out soon. So just educating people on that's going to be released into the market. So get ready for that moment. So things like this is interesting to me. I'm always looking for I don't want to say what's the underdog, but what's the, where's the stone unturned yet, or where very little people are talking about it. So I'm usually going, counterculture of what everybody else may be talking about. Maybe other people in the wine industry that's like-minded, like me, we're talking about these things. But yeah, I choose to kind of go out my way to make it difficult. No, to like look for a challenge, because I like being educated through wine in that case. So it makes me kind of think about a local culture or local cuisine or the people there and their history. Portugal is one of those places, like, you can't understand why things are happening for Portugal that didn't happen, or that did happen for like Spain or France, unless you understand the history of the country. And some people kind of like, I love wine, I love this, but don't really understand that it's way bigger than just, juice in a glass. And so we can't, I guess it's that like Americanized idea that, I like, when you're a traveler, it happens. You fly into a country and you hear people say, why don't I speak English? Because you're in France. Like, that's not gonna happen, right? And so it's the same idea with wine. It happens too. People are like, oh, well, how come they just don't have Chardonnay? Because you're in Portugal. And so it's not that no one's making Chardonnay. It's just that I'm not gonna pour it for you. Like, you might as well learn about a new grape. You're in Portugal, for God's sake. So let's talk about Portuguese grapes, because we're in Portugal, and so there's that, it has to be the people like myself who are passionate about, not pushing Chardonnay in Portugal in order to like make that happen. And I think that's like really what's important. Of course, is there some nice Chardonnays in Portugal? Of course there are. But I really think it's more about trying to get people to understand grapes and locale and terroir, as we say. Obviously, if a grape is native to that area, it's going to do way better and probably even outperform if someone ripped out the roots and put in Chardonnay. And so just think about it from that context, and that's the reason why. Well, Chardonnay does well everywhere, so that's a horrible grape to use. But, let's say, Gewürztraminer, like I mentioned earlier. So, so just keeping that in mind.
I love that answer. Talking about orange wine and Georgian wine. I started doing an orange wine class virtually through the shop. That's been super fun, and it's gotten a lot of traction. Like, a lot of people, we get people coming in all the time asking for our orange wines, which I love. I got to drink not a ton, but some Georgian wine while I was living in New York. We don't have a lot of Georgian wine down here in North Carolina yet. I think there's going to be more in the market kind of moving forward. We've got some distributors that are talking about starting to carry more. But yeah, I definitely agree. Like, it's crazy how people like ask so many questions about orange wine. And, like, why aren't you asking these same questions about all these other things?
Wine.
Like, orange wine, the one catalyst for like getting, which, I mean, I get it, because it is kind of a crazy concept to some people, like a whole new different color of wine. So I love that answer.
But I think also it's because of orange wine would presume that there's oranges in the wine. So that usually kind of sparks their curiosity. Is like, why are we calling it orange? Yeah. Then there's ones that actually look the color like it's orange juice in a glass. And that's why when I, respectfully, when I speak about Georgian wines, I say amber wines, or correct myself, because that's what they use, of course, and that's what is traditionally named there. But, we need to get out of the idea of calling it orange wine all the time, because some wines are not the color orange, and then you throw off like half the consumers. Like, oh, I thought you said this was orange too. I went home and it's not as orange as the last one I had. You're like, oh gosh, you didn't get the concept. The concept is not about the color orange. It's more about how it's made, and so there's that kind of like confusion that you have to like work around with them once that happens. So yeah, orange wine, it's a thing, but we know it's going to take a while for people to basically get it for real. But if they ask these questions, like you said, hopefully you use that as a gateway to like, well, like what I do with rosé. Like, okay, well, if you're asking me this about orange wine, it makes me feel like you don't know how rosé is made either. So let's have a larger conversation about how wine is made in general. So
Yeah, of all the classes I teach, I would say the orange wine is probably, I get like the most questions like from people rather than me just like talking at people. I could get the most like, what about this and what about that and like what does this mean, and get so many questions from people. So I love that orange and amber and skin contact white wines are like really like starting that conversation with people. It's one of my favorite styles of wine. It's kind of one of the styles that sort of got me in, like into like wanting to be in wine. So I love
Yeah.
that.
I don't know if you watched that episode of United We Taste, but I would definitely tell you and share with your audience. I mean, it's right up on YouTube, so you know, you don't have to like request a recording. You can literally just play it.
I'm definitely gonna go look at that. I was looking at your website earlier today, and I saw that, and I was like, ooh, I need to go and watch that because that looks super interesting, right up my alley. So love that.
A lot of people learn stuff. I just wanted to like say that it's because it's cool when you have other professionals in a room, because it's not so much you can see what people don't know, but you would be surprised how much we already assume everybody knows everything. But the person who like spent their whole life like studying Burgundy, for example, they're not really abreast of what's happening in some small corner of Chile.
Yeah.
So in the case with Rachel, she's studying so much Chilean wine, you end up being the expert in the room. And that's what I realized, especially for you young folks. If you are starting your career, you know, and you really love a particular style or region, rip it open, like literally go nose deep, Google it to like the 10th page and know every content that's in here, because for anybody who follows my journey or know anything about me, that is how I end up standing out maybe a little bit earlier than some other people who've been working in this industry way longer than me, full time, you know, and I've been doing it way like off and on while still working at, you know, in my full-time role as an engineer, and, you know, just being, you know, the girl at the bottle shop. And some people know me from that, which is the interesting part too. So I don't think that the bottle shop, you know, is much respect for the shop too. Now people from my neighborhood who now follow me on Instagram, etc., like, oh, I remember when I came to buy wine one day, he was talking to me in the shop like 5 years ago. And I'm like, yeah, that's me. I'm I'm not there anymore, but yes, I'm the same girl, you know. And so I think that you never know. Maybe that may get people to connect with you in a real way because they know where you started from, and versus other people who may just be following the hype or the media of you right now. So put your nose in. You know, people think I'm some overnight, you know, sensation. And I'm like, I've been in the back of somebody's storage room for years. And so, trust me, you still gotta do your time in some way, maybe on the floor for people that's in restaurants, or whatever way maybe. So.
Absolutely. So kind of circling back to like the orange wine thing, we've definitely seen that as a trend. We've also, like in the past year or so, we've had a lot of people coming into the wine shop asking about natural wines. You know, it's kind of like, hey, can I help you find anything? And they're like, where's the natural wine? And, you know, we carry a lot of minimal intervention wines here. So, you know, it always sparks a really interesting conversation. So like, you know, what kind of wine are you looking for? Is a particular region that you're interested in, right? Like, but there is this kind of like a little bit of a hype around natural wine as like a buzzword, right? So what do you think about like that terminology and natural wine as a trend, but like, is it here to stay, or is this a trend? You know what I mean?
I mean, you know, natural, just like orange wine / amber wine, which dates back to any of these trends or Instagram or us, you know, existing, you know.
Yeah.
And when I say us, meaning, you know, literally the people that's talking about it today, and probably even before our country, you know, even existed. So in this case, there is natural wine is the same way, you know, minimal intervention, low intervention wines. I am definitely for. I don't need a tattoo on my forehead to say that though. And I think that's the difference, is that there is this way that, you know, conventional wine is like the devil, and, you know, the people who've like kind of band together to like to kind of like build that barrier and exclude people. And I mean that in a way where consumers as well as other winemakers, you can tell there's a lot of tension. I wrote an article for Wine Enthusiast about top wine places, wine bars to enjoy natural Portuguese wine. And so in Portugal. And so, you know, it's funny because somebody I actually know was like, oh, like started questioning about like, what makes it natural? I'm like, did you read the article? I'm not explaining what natural wine is. I'm just telling you the best places I like to drink this style of wine when in Lisbon, because I realized it was a growing trend like you are stating too. So I'm like, oh, when you're in Lisbon, I don't care if you're American, German, Swedish, and then you're coming to visit, these are the places where I think you would have a good selection. That's all I said. Like, you know, like, why are you coming to crucify me because they have so much, like, oh, like, I thought you was on our side. Now you're talking about natural wine. I'm like, calm down, calm down. You know, let's just realize that they do have, there is like a large, like I would say, there's hostility amongst other winemakers with those who call themselves natural winemakers. And so, and then when I meet with some winemakers, they'll tell you, oh yeah, I don't do anything with my wine. I don't do this. I don't do that. So you go, okay, so your wine is natural. And they're like, but I don't want to be put in that group. So then there's the people who are making as the find that wine as natural wine. However, once you get put into that like group, it's kind of like you can never adjust the wine any year in the future, because now you're considered a natural winemaker. So you have to hold up to this kind of the laws of natural wine. And so that ends up allowing winemakers who do, let's say most of the years, don't add whether it's sulfites or any of the bad things to the wine, that depending on which person you're talking to, how they may define natural wine, because there's no actual definition or regulation, I should say, for it. So let's be clear on that. But I always tell people, when people are like, what is natural wine to you? I always say I follow the definition that's written by the master of wine, Isabel, the founder of Raw Wine. And that is what I define natural wine by her definition. So, you know, in my case, I'm like letting you know that I'm going to her definition as my Webster version. Other people may say something else, you know, because she allows in her definition that sulfites can be added up to a certain number. So in this case, somebody else say, no, it got to be 0 sulfites. So then everyone has separate opinions. So in this case, I'm just telling you who I follow. You can follow somebody else's definition, it's fine. Or come up with your own, which seems to be more suitable for most people. You know, because to be honest, some things is a little bit over the top for me. You know, I know winemakers that I know personally that may be using like literally horse and buggy and like, you know, they're like using windmills and things like this. And so they think that's like the definition of natural wine. So you can't even use like a machine in any way. And I'm like, okay. Or like being aged in some, you know, rare, unique form, you know. I'm like, So, and then most people, just to give you a perspective, because that's another reason why I went to Portugal, because I wanted to be around winemakers. Being in New York or in America, in the country, in the states that do not make wine, or if you're not surrounded around winemakers, we're coming up with conversations about wine when we don't make it. So how are we describing, creating rules, but you're not around the winemakers who are having the internal discussions about this and making the decision and know why they made the decision to include this or not include that, or why they realize they can be natural and they just happy you're buying it. I'm like, oh, all your customers love it? Great. They don't care. It's just that they're actual, well, they care that it's selling well, but they didn't like put natural on their wine label to be a gimmick. They literally have a terroir in microclimates that allows them to make the wine without adding things. So they just happen to be blessed in a perfect location. So if they was put in, you know, Mosel, Germany, they probably would have a different conversation with you, right? But they just happen to be in the very beautiful location in Spain that the rain goes away and the sun comes out perfectly at the right time, and the soil just, you know, it glistens and retains the water. So they had all these like perfect factors to make natural wine. So they love that we're all hyped out about it, but all they did was, you know, be born in the right region. Right. And so I think there's something to say about that versus someone like making wine on some mountaintop who clearly needs a balance of this and that to add and need to adjust wine a certain way, or can't use a damn horse and buggy or whatever the hell. And so there needs to be some grace given to the folks who are using things, and maybe there might not be the most, zero intervention at all. Maybe there is some intervention as much as they need to for that vintage to save that wine before, he loses property. When do we humanize the fact that this is a winemaker, not a conglomerate, not some big corporate company making wine? And so him trying to adjust, or her, the family, trying to adjust the wine so that they can be able to sell the wine so they won't go broke and be homeless because this is, this is their livelihood. I think that's the difference between how I think about natural wine. And that's why I don't go around tattooing it on my head that, I drink natural wine and all this other stuff, because I feel like I'm not leaving grace for the folks who cannot hold up to the rules and the restrictions that come to when you think about natural wine. So in that case, it's like, all right, I can't say I only drink that and I only subscribe for this style with no intervention at all. Then there's times when it's other case where it's like some people, it's not the last thing on their mind. They will never put it out. They making a wine. They just want to get it out. They talking about quantity versus quality, and therefore the push is very, it's ingenuine to what they really need to do. Because you can go meet their neighbors, and their neighbors is like, oh yeah, I make wine naturally and everything's good. So you're like, so why this guy got to do all this stuff to this wine? And so in this case, you're like, okay, I see he's just trying to take shortcuts and make a bulk of wine. Hey, cat.
Hi, queso.
Versus actually having a more thorough, thought out process and being more intentional when they're making the wine. When they're making the wine versus just doing it for okay, I just want to make bulk wine and make all this money from it. So
absolutely. No, and it's interesting. I was just reading the Punch released an article about the verbiage, the verbiage about wine, and how there's kind of this old school way that's ostracizing, and now there's this new wave natty wine bro kind of thing that's also ostracizing. So it's it's a big part of what we do here is trying to make wine more approachable, right? For everyone and less intimidating, which I think we've established that culture pretty well, but it's an ongoing thing, so I don't know. I guess my question is,
think about it always. The people that's work in the field, on the vines, you talk about approachable for everyone, and so there's gonna always be these wines that's the ones, you feel like you can't obtain them because literally they cost so much money. That style of wine may be becoming less of a trend today because of the type, calling us Gen X, Y, Zers. We all are looking for a different style of wine than the baby boomers were keeping and hoarding and, cellaring for years and rising the price. But I think that when it comes to the economics of wine too, so then we'll see what happens in the future. If everybody's making glue, aka chuggable reds today, then what wine is available to age for 10 years from now for us to rise in commodities of wine, right? So then now it's going to be a shift in the fact that, businesses like Sotheby's, et cetera, who auction off high-end wine, what would be that wine in 2030, in 2040? If a bunch of winemakers are now making a bunch of natural wines, and it'll say in the news, oh yeah, there's nothing to auction off anymore because everything, for this period of time, everything started changing and people started making these wines that people were like, no girl, drink now, and so therefore that changes in style. Now it's about how ageable are those wines. That's what I'm questioning now. And some of them are, but that's not the atmosphere of talking about accessible wine. Access. And right now, I want this. I want to drink it now. You're making accessible wine. I can reach it. I can touch it. I can drink it. It's not something that you're saying, no. This is for that special day, and you put it away. So it's not so accessible, huh? Even if you purchased it, now you're telling me to now, cellar it for the next 15 years. So what do I drink today, you know? So, and so now that there's more of a trend to making more approachable, accessible wines, then I think I'll be very interested in seeing where we are 20 years from now. What wines are people cellaring then?